Artificial bosses making new reality, twisting dreams into insanity. In the darkness you cannot hide, it's what goes bump in the night. So you better run, you better hide. This is a nightmare in artificial form. In the darkness terrorize, it's what goes bump in the night.
Do you dare to venture into the depths of the unknown? Tales of night-haunting creatures have echoed through generations, yet none as chilling as the legend of the Rake. Its story has kept countless souls from wandering the wilderness after dusk. Follow the harrowing journey of one hunter whose encounter with this sinister and otherworldly being will leave you breathless. Henry had always felt at home in the wilderness, spending most of his childhood hunting birds, deer, and the occasional bear with his father. Now in his 30s, he was hunting a new property he'd just purchased in the Manistee National Forest. The dense Michigan forest with rolling hills and with its towering trees and rustling leaves was his sanctuary. Henry felt he had his own slice of heaven and was eager to hunt and explore the vast property he had purchased. Before the hunting season, Henry placed a series of trail cameras around his property, near the best deer sign he could find on his property. But on that crisp October morning, something felt off. The wind was dead, the chill was deep, and an eerie silence blanketed the forest. The usual symphony of rustling leaves and chattering wildlife was conspicuously absent, replaced by a haunting stillness that gnawed at Henry's instincts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking just beyond the edge of his vision, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Henry moved deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare him. Shadows danced ominously in the periphery, twisting and contorting into shapes that defied explanation. A distant rustling caught his ear, sending a shiver down his spine, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there, only the oppressive stillness and the sense of being watched. He tightened his grip on his rifle, the metal cold and unyielding against his skin. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he pushed forward, each step echoing like a thunderclap in the unnatural quiet. Henry, a seasoned hunter renowned for his courage, ventured into the woods further to reach his trail camera. As he walked, the air grew colder and an eerie silence blanketed the forest. The once familiar woods now felt alien, as if they were concealing secrets buried for centuries. Henry had always prided himself on his ability to navigate these woods, but today, something was profoundly different. The usual symphony of rustling leaves and chirping birds was absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to press down on him from all sides. He noticed strange markings on the trees, as if something had clawed its way through. The deep gashes were unlike anything he had ever seen. Each mark was precise, almost deliberate, as if the rake had a purpose. Henry ran his fingers over the grooves, feeling the raw power that had created them. The bark was shredded and the wood beneath was splintered and raw. It was a chilling reminder that he was not the only predator in these woods. The markings were fresh, the sap still weeping from the wounds in the trees. Henry's pulse quickened as he traced the lines, each one a testament to the presence of something ancient and malevolent. The stories of the Rake, a creature whispered about in hushed tones around campfires, flooded his mind. Legends spoke of its haunting eyes and razor-sharp claws, a being that thrived on fear and darkness. As Henry made his way through the woods, his heart raced and adrenaline surged through his veins, urging him to move faster. He needed to reach his trail camera before whatever lurked in these woods found him. He hoped it was just a bear and that his imagination was running wild. Finally, he arrived at the trail camera, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. With trembling hands, he began scrolling through the photos, seeing the usual wildlife, but as he approached the most recent images, a chill ran down his spine. One photo, taken just last night, showed what he first thought was a smudge. As he examined it closer, his blood ran cold. It wasn't a smudge, it was the Rake. The creature's gaunt, pale figure was unmistakable, its hollow eyes seeming to pierce through the lens and into Henry's very soul. The reality of the situation hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a story to scare campers. It was real, and it was out there, in the very woods he stood in. Henry's breath quickened, and his hands shook as he frantically scanned the surrounding trees, every rustle and shadow now a potential threat. The forest, which had always been his haven, now felt like a sinister maze with danger lurking behind every tree. The oppressive silence was now filled with the deafening roar of his own heartbeat and the knowledge that he was not alone. Panic set in as Henry tried to make sense of the chaos around him. His instincts kicked in, urging him to stay alert. The rake's presence was palpable, sending chills down his spine. He could feel its eyes on him, watching his every move. The forest, once a place of solace and peace, had become a nightmarish landscape. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent his heart racing. Henry knew he had to keep moving, but every step felt like a gamble. The oppressive silence was broken only by his ragged breathing and the pounding of his heart. Shadows twisted and danced at the edge of his vision, playing tricks on his mind. He strained to listen, to detect any sign of the creature stalking him, but the forest remained unnervingly quiet. The trail camera's image burned in his mind. The gaunt, pale figure of the rake, its hollow eyes boring into him. The reality of the situation was overwhelming. This was no mere legend, it was a living nightmare. Henry's grip tightened on his rifle, the cold metal a small comfort in the face of the unknown terror. As he moved deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air grew colder, each breath a plume of mist. He forced himself to stay focused, to push back the rising tide of fear. But this feeling of being watched was inescapable, a constant gnawing dread that sapped his strength and resolve. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to react at the slightest provocation. He scanned his surroundings, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of movement. He knew he had to find a way out of this nightmare, but with every passing second, the forest seemed to tighten its grip on him, drawing him deeper into its dark embrace. Every step he took was filled with dread as he ventured deeper into the unknown. The forest seemed to close in around him, and the sense of impending doom grew stronger with each passing moment. Henry's mind raced with questions. What was the rake? Where had it come from? And most importantly, how could he escape? The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, and the trees seemed to twist and contort, creating a labyrinthine maze. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on him as if it were alive and aware of his presence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and he could almost make out words, though they were in a language he did not understand. Henry knew he had to find a way out, but the forest seemed determined to keep him within its grasp. The sense of being hunted was overwhelming, and he could feel the rake drawing closer with each passing second. His only hope was to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the terror that lurked in the shadows. Determined to prove his mettle, Henry loaded his rifle and ventured deeper into the forest, driven by an overwhelming urge to confront the rake and end any threat it posed to his newfound property. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. He had heard the stories, the legends of the creature that supposedly roamed these woods, but he needed to see it for himself. The dense canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight, casting eerie shadows that danced with every step he took. Each rustle of leaves and crackle of twigs underfoot seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. Henry pressed on, his senses heightened, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. His breath billowed in the cold air, each exhales forming a ghostly plume against the biting chill that enveloped him. The darkening forest was unforgiving, and every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night, echoing through the silent trees like a haunting symphony. The forest seemed to close in around him, consuming everything around him. He was in full tunnel vision, the silence amplifying his every step. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot echoed like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. He felt as though the trees themselves were watching him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, out of the shadows, a monstrous figure emerged, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was as if the darkness itself had come to life, taking form in this nightmarish creature. Henry's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he was paralyzed with fear. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Henry barely had time to react as the rake lunged at him with terrifying speed. Instinct took over, and he threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the beast's deadly claws. The sound of its growl was deafening, a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath him. His heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as he scrambled to his feet. He dodged just in time, but the rake's claws grazed his arm, leaving a deep gash. Blood dripped from the wound, staining the fall leaves beneath him a vivid red. The pain was immediate and intense, but he couldn't afford to focus on it now. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees whispering secrets of ancient battles fought and lost. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept him moving. His mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. He knew he couldn't outrun the rake, and his chances of surviving a direct confrontation were slim, but he had to try. He had come too far to turn back now. The tension was palpable. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to react. He could see the rake more clearly now. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a grotesque amalgamation of man and beast. Its body pale white with a rough and decaying fleshy skin, and its limbs were twisted and deformed. It moved with a predatory grace, its eyes never leaving him. The creature's presence was suffocating, a living nightmare that defied all logic and reason. Its growls echoed through the forest, sending shivers down his spine. The sound was otherworldly, a chilling reminder of the danger he was in. He tightened his grip on his rifle, knowing that it was his only chance of survival. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the very air thick with tension and dread. Henry knew he had to fight for his life, but the odds were against him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. This was a fight for survival, a test of his courage and determination. As the rake circled him, he knew that every decision he made in the next few moments would determine his fate. He had to stay calm, think clearly, and most importantly, he had to believe in himself. The forest was silent, save for the growls of the beast and the pounding of his own heart. It was a moment of truth, a defining encounter that would either make him a legend or a cautionary tale. With a final, resolute breath, Henry prepared to face the rake head-on, ready to prove his mettle once and for all. The weight of the forest's ancient secrets pressed down on him, and he knew that this encounter would be etched into the annals of history, one way or another. The chase was relentless. Henry sprinted through the forest at breakneck speed, branches whipping at his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rake was right behind him, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground like a drumbeat. He could feel its hot breath on his neck, and the fear was overwhelming. Every step was a struggle as he dodged low-hanging branches and leapt over fallen logs. He stumbled over a fallen log, barely managing to keep his balance. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees becoming a blur as he ran for his life. He could hear the rake's snarls growing louder, each one sending a jolt of terror through his body. The urgency was palpable. He knew he couldn't keep this pace forever. Desperation set in as he searched for a way to escape, his mind racing with possibilities. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip him at every turn. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the precious seconds slipping away. The aftermath was haunting. The hunter, now known as Henry, had managed to escape, but the encounter had left him scarred, both physically and mentally. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, had transformed into a realm of nightmares. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down his spine. The memory of the rake's eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, was etched into his mind. He could still hear its growl, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very core of his being. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, replaying the events in his mind. The forest was quiet now, but he knew the rake was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The fire's warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep within him. He vowed never to return to the forest. The forest, with its towering trees and dense underbrush, had become a prison of fear. He could almost see the rake's silhouette in the flickering shadows cast by the fire. He could still feel its presence, a constant reminder of the terror he had faced. It was as if the rake had left a part of itself with him, a dark shadow that followed him wherever he went. Henry's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He questioned his sanity, wondering if the rake was a figment of his imagination, but the pain from his wounds was real, a painful reminder of the encounter. Henry's wounds throbbed, a painful reminder of how close he had come to death. Each throb was a heartbeat, a testament to his survival. He had faced death and lived to tell the tale, but at what cost? The physical wounds would heal, but the mental scars would remain. He had heard stories of other hunters who had encountered the rake, tales of madness and despair. He wondered if he would share the same fate. He knew he couldn't stay here, but the thought of venturing back into the forest filled him with dread. The forest was no longer a place of adventure, it was a place of nightmares. He had to leave, to find a place where he could heal, both physically and mentally. But the thought of leaving the safety of the fire, of stepping back into the darkness, was almost too much to bear. He knew the rake was out there, waiting. Years passed, but the horrors he had witnessed stayed with him. Henry had survived the encounter, but the battle was far from over. Driven by an unquenchable thirst for revenge, he returned to the very section of the forest where the battle took place. Determined and resolute, he swore to conquer his fears and settle the score once and for all. The forest had changed him, had marked him in ways he couldn't yet understand, but he was a hunter, and hunters didn't give up. He would find a way to overcome the darkness, to reclaim his life. Henry knew that the forest held many secrets and that he had only scratched the surface. There were legends of creatures that roamed the woods, of spirits that haunted the trees. He had become a part of those legends, a living testament to the horrors that lurked in the shadows. But he was determined to survive, to find a way to live with the darkness. The forest had taken much from him, but it had also given him a new purpose. He would become the guardian of the forest, the one who stood between the darkness and the light.
What goes bump, bump, bump? Oh, goes bump in the night. Oh, can't run for the Rake. It's relentless and tireless, for heaven's sake.